Before we begin today's powerful story, comment where you're watching from. This tale of dignity, prejudice, and quiet strength will leave you speechless. The year was 1956, and the evening air at New York's Idlewild Airport carried the weight of autumn's approach. Inside the first-class lounge, Richard Sterling sat reviewing contracts on his gold-plated fountain pen, occasionally glancing at his expensive watch with the impatience of someone who believed time should bend to his will. The businessman had built his reputation in Manhattan's ruthless corporate world, and he wore his success like armor, his tailored suit and leather briefcase marking him as someone who measured worth in dollars and cents. Grace Anderson moved with practiced efficiency through her pre-flight duties, her 15 years of experience giving her an instinct for which flights would be routine and which would become memorable. Something about tonight's flight to Los Angeles felt different, though she couldn't quite place why. The first-class cabin of Flight 217 slowly filled with its usual mix of business travelers and wealthy passengers. Catherine Walsh, seated in 2A, noticed how Richard seemed to make a show of his presence, speaking loudly about merger deals and stock options, ensuring everyone knew just how important he was. Sarah Mitchell was arranging welcome drinks when she noticed a distinguished African-American man enter the first-class cabin. He moved with the fluid grace of an athlete, though his demeanor was quietly dignified. He wore a well-tailored suit, nothing flashy, but speaking of quality and taste, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had faced far greater challenges than a cross-country flight. The man took his assigned seat in 3B, directly next to Sterling's spot. While other passengers busied themselves with phones and newspapers, he simply sat quietly, his presence somehow more commanding in its stillness than Sterling's loud assertions of importance. Walter Bennett, a passenger in his 70s, kept glancing at the quiet man with growing excitement, though he remained respectfully in his seat. He had been a Brooklyn Dodgers fan for decades, and there was something unmistakably familiar about the dignified passenger that made his heart race with recognition. Captain Michael Harrison stopped by the first-class cabin during his pre-flight checks, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. When his gaze fell on the newly arrived passenger, a flash of recognition crossed his face, though he maintained his professional demeanor. James Parker, fresh out of college and traveling on his first business trip, sat across the aisle, occasionally stealing glances at the quiet passenger. Unlike Sterling, who measured worth by the price of one's suit, James had been raised to recognize true greatness when he saw it. The evening light streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the cabin as the last passengers settled in. Sterling's voice cut through the usual pre-flight murmur as he continued a phone conversation, each word carefully chosen to impress those around him. "Of course the deal is worth 8 figures, he announced to no one in particular as he finally ended his call. "That's the minimum buy-in for anyone wanting to play in my league." His voice carried the smug satisfaction of someone who believed money was the only measure of success. The distinguished passenger shifted slightly in his seat, not out of irritation but with the patient tolerance of someone who had seen far too much life to be bothered by such displays. Grace Anderson noticed how he carried himself with quiet dignity, his presence somehow more commanding than Sterling's loud assertions of importance. As the flight attendants began their final preparations, Sterling made a show of demanding special attention. "I assume you know how to properly chill champagne," he said to Sarah, his tone dripping with condescension. "The last flight I was on, they served it at practically room temperature. Simply unacceptable for first class." The distinguished man reached up to adjust the air vent above his seat, his movement causing Sterling to turn and notice him for the first time. The businessman's eyes narrowed as he took in his seatmate's presence, his expression darkening with something ugly and all too familiar. "Excuse me," Sterling said, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who had never learned the difference between wealth and worth. "I believe there must be some mistake. First class is rather exclusive, you understand." A hush fell over the nearby passengers. Catherine Walsh looked up from her work, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and disapproval. James Parker set down his magazine, his body tensing slightly as if preparing to intervene. The distinguished man simply smiled, a gentle expression that carried decades of dealing with far worse than an arrogant businessman. "No mistake," he replied quietly, his voice carrying a warmth that made Sterling's cold condescension seem even more jarring. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Walter Bennett's excitement had turned to indignation, though he held his tongue for the moment. He had grown up watching this man make history, and to see him treated with such disrespect made his blood boil. "Well," Sterling continued, either missing or ignoring the changing atmosphere in the cabin, "I suppose they'll let anyone in first class these days. Rather defeats the purpose of paying a premium for exclusivity, doesn't it?" Grace Anderson moved toward the situation, her experience telling her that something significant was about to unfold. Captain Harrison, still in the cabin, had also noticed the exchange, his expression suggesting he knew exactly who was being insulted. Jackie Robinson's response was simply to smile again, his dignity in the face of rudeness making Sterling's behavior seem even more petty. There was something about his calm demeanor that suggested he had faced far greater challenges than an entitled passenger's prejudice. As Chapter 1 draws to a close, the first-class cabin of Flight 217 has become a stage for something extraordinary. Richard Sterling, proud of his wealth and status, has no idea that he's about to learn an unforgettable lesson about true greatness and the danger of judging others by appearances. What happens next will not only leave Sterling speechless but will teach everyone present an invaluable lesson about respect, dignity, and the true measure of a person's worth. Stay tuned for Chapter 2, where this powerful encounter takes an unexpected turn. Don't forget to like and subscribe to catch the next chapter of this incredible story. Have you ever witnessed someone handle prejudice with unexpected grace? Share your story in the comments below. The evening light continued to fade outside the windows of Flight 217 as the aircraft prepared for departure. In the first-class cabin, tension hung in the air like static before a storm. Richard Sterling's dismissive comments had created an atmosphere that even the gentle hum of the engines couldn't dispel. Grace Anderson moved through her pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency, though her attention remained focused on the developing situation. In 15 years of flying, she had learned to read the subtle signs that preceded significant moments, and everything about this interaction felt important. "I mean, really," Sterling continued, his voice pitched to carry across the cabin, "there should be some standards maintained. First class isn't just about the wider seats, it's about exclusivity, about maintaining a certain environment." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Jackie Robinson. Jackie, whose simple dignity seemed to grow more pronounced with each of Sterling's attempts to diminish him, simply adjusted his reading light and settled more comfortably into his seat. There was something almost amusing in his expression, as if he had seen this story play out many times before. Walter Bennett, his face flushed with barely contained indignation, shifted in his seat. The baseball magazine he held in his hands, its cover featuring the Brooklyn Dodgers' latest triumph, was crumpled slightly at the edges from his tight grip as he fought the urge to speak up. James Parker watched the scene unfold with growing concern. As a young man who had grown up hearing stories about Jackie Robinson's courage in breaking baseball's color barrier, he found himself witnessing firsthand the kind of prejudice his hero had faced throughout his career. Sarah Mitchell approached with the pre-flight drink service, her movements deliberate as she tried to catch Grace's eye. The senior flight attendant gave a subtle nod. They would handle this situation carefully, allowing it to unfold in its own time. Catherine Walsh had abandoned any pretense of working on her documents, her attention fully captured by the drama playing out in the first-class cabin. She noticed how other passengers seemed to be holding their breath, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. Captain Michael Harrison, who had delayed his return to the cockpit to observe the situation, stood near the galley entrance. His expression suggested he was watching not just as a captain responsible for his passengers' comfort, but as someone who understood the historical weight of what was unfolding. "I've worked hard for my success," Sterling announced to no one in particular, though his words were clearly meant to justify his earlier behavior. That's what first class represents: achievement, success, a certain level of accomplishment. He took a deliberate sip of his champagne, his signet ring catching the light as he raised the glass. Jackie's response was simply to reach into his briefcase, extracting a newspaper. The movement was smooth, athletic despite his business attire, carrying the fluid grace that had made him one of baseball's most exciting players. "Some of us," Sterling continued, his voice taking on an instructional tone, have earned our place here through hard work and business acumen. It's not just about having a ticket, it's about belonging in an environment of success. James Parker noticed how several other passengers were now openly glaring at Sterling, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and disapproval. The businessman seemed oblivious to the growing hostility his words were creating. Walter Bennett's grip on his magazine tightened further. Jackie's calm demeanor in the face of such disrespect only made Sterling's behavior seem more offensive. Here was a man who had faced down some of the greatest challenges in sports history, being lectured about belonging by someone who clearly had no idea who he was addressing. Grace Anderson approached with quiet authority, her presence somehow managing to calm the tension without directly addressing it. "Can I get you anything, sir?" she asked Jackie, her tone carrying a respect that made Sterling's rudeness seem even more jarring. "Just water, thank you," Jackie replied, his voice carrying the warm authority of someone who had no need to prove his worth to anyone. "And maybe a newspaper if you have one." His smile carried a hint of mischief, as if sharing a private joke with history itself. Sterling turned at the sound of Jackie's voice, his expression suggesting that he found the simple request somehow offensive. "Water?" he scoffed. "In first class? I suppose you're not used to the proper menu options up here." Sarah Mitchell, returning with the requested water, couldn't help but notice how Jackie's presence seemed to fill the cabin with a quiet strength that made Sterling's posturing seem increasingly small and insignificant. "You know," Sterling continued, unable to let the moment pass, "there's a certain standard we maintain in first class. It's not just about being able to buy a ticket, it's about understanding the proper social protocols, the expected behaviors." Jackie turned a page in his newspaper, his movements unhurried and deliberate. Those closest could see that he was reading the sports section, where his own name appeared in a headline about the Dodgers' pennant race. The irony seemed lost on Sterling, who continued his misguided attempt at social instruction. "I've flown first class for years," Sterling pressed on, his voice carrying a mix of condescension and growing irritation at Jackie's composed silence. "I know the type of people who belong here. The successful ones, the ones who've earned their place through hard work and determination." Walter Bennett let out a small, involuntary sound, something between a laugh and a scoff. He had watched Jackie Robinson earn his place in history through more hard work and determination than Sterling could ever imagine, facing challenges that made first-class airline protocols seem absurdly trivial. Catherine Walsh's embarrassment at her colleague's behavior had turned to open dismay. She had worked with Sterling on numerous deals, but she had never seen this side of him so openly displayed. His usual corporate arrogance had transformed into something uglier, something that revealed character rather than just poor manners. James Parker found himself remembering his father's stories about watching Jackie Robinson's first season with the Dodgers, about the grace and courage it had taken to break baseball's color barrier. Now here he was, witnessing firsthand the kind of prejudice Robinson had faced and overcome. The cabin pressure adjusted as the aircraft prepared for takeoff, the subtle change somehow emphasizing the growing tension in the first-class section. Grace Anderson positioned herself nearby, ready to intervene if Sterling's behavior escalated beyond mere rudeness. "I suppose," Sterling said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you think having a first-class ticket makes you belong here. But there's more to it than that. There's an understanding of proper society, of the natural order of things." As Chapter 2 draws to a close, the first-class cabin of Flight 217 has become an unlikely stage for a lesson in dignity and prejudice. Sterling, secure in his misguided sense of superiority, has no idea that he's about to learn how true greatness carries itself with quiet dignity, or that some achievements need no designer labels to prove their worth. What happens next will not only expose Sterling's ignorance but will remind everyone present about the difference between genuine accomplishment and mere wealth. Stay tuned for Chapter 3, where this encounter reaches its powerful turning point. Don't forget to like and subscribe to catch the next chapter of this moving story. Have you ever witnessed someone maintain their dignity in the face of prejudice? Share your story in the comments below. The aircraft had reached cruising altitude, but the atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained charged with unspoken tension. Richard Sterling had settled into what he clearly thought was a victorious silence, occasionally casting superior glances around the cabin as if to remind everyone of his self-proclaimed status. Walter Bennett could contain himself no longer. The baseball magazine in his hands, a treasured copy featuring Jackie Robinson's latest achievements, had become his anchor to reality as he witnessed this display of ignorance. With hands that trembled slightly with age and emotion, he reached into his carry-on bag. "Mr. Robinson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of admiration, "I never thought I'd have the chance to tell you this, but I was there at Ebbets Field in '47. Your first game. You changed baseball forever. You changed America forever." The cabin fell silent. Even the engine noise seemed to fade as the name hung in the air. Sterling's head snapped around, his expression transforming from condescension to dawning realization. Jackie Robinson, the man who had broken baseball's color barrier, who had faced down hatred with unwavering dignity, who had changed American sports forever, sat calmly beside him. Grace Anderson watched as the color drained from Sterling's face. The businessman's expensive suit suddenly seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders as he began to understand exactly who he had been lecturing about belonging in first class. James Parker leaned forward, unable to contain his own excitement now that the moment had arrived. "Mr. Robinson," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "my father tells me stories about watching you play. He says you didn't just excel at baseball, you showed America what courage looks like." Sarah Mitchell noticed how the entire atmosphere of the cabin had shifted. The tension had been replaced by a sense of awe, as passengers began to realize they were in the presence of genuine greatness, not the kind that came from business deals or stock portfolios, but the kind that had helped change society itself. "You know," Jackie finally spoke, his voice carrying the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire career, "I've learned that true class has nothing to do with where you sit on an airplane. It's about how you carry yourself, especially when others try to make you feel like you don't belong." Sterling sat frozen in his seat, the full weight of his mistake crushing down on him. Behind him sat not just a baseball legend, but a man who had faced far worse than first-class snobbery with unshakable dignity. A man whose achievements had helped break down barriers and change the face of American sports. Catherine Walsh watched her colleague's transformation with a mixture of satisfaction and embarrassment. Sterling had spent the flight boasting about his business accomplishments, only to find himself sitting next to someone whose achievements had actually changed history. "Mr. Robinson," Walter Bennett continued, his voice steadier now, "you showed us something more important than baseball. You showed us that dignity doesn't come from wealth or status, it comes from how you handle life's challenges." Captain Michael Harrison, making another check on the cabin, added his own words of respect. "Mr. Robinson, having you aboard is an honor. You've taught America lessons that go far beyond sports." Other passengers began sharing their own connections to Jackie's legacy. One woman spoke about how her children now played in integrated leagues, something unimaginable just a decade earlier. Another passenger mentioned how Robinson's example had inspired him to push through his own barriers in business. "You see," Jackie said, addressing no one in particular but his words clearly meant for everyone, "baseball taught me something important. It's not about who has the most expensive equipment or who makes the loudest noise. It's about what you do when you face a challenge, how you handle both success and adversity with grace." Sterling seemed to shrink further into his seat with each word. His earlier boasts about success and belonging felt hollow now, exposed by the presence of someone who had achieved true greatness through talent, determination, and unshakable character. "Mr. Robinson," James Parker said, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of youth, "you didn't just play baseball. You showed us what was possible. When you stepped onto that field in 1947, you weren't just playing a game, you were opening doors for generations to come." Jackie's smile widened at the young man's words. "That's kind of you to say," he replied. "But you know what I'm most proud of? Not the hits or the stolen bases. I'm proud that maybe I helped show people that character matters more than color, that excellence speaks louder than prejudice." Sterling had turned fully in his seat now, his earlier pretense of superiority completely forgotten. "Mr. Robinson," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology. My behavior was inexcusable. Jackie's response was characteristic of the man who had faced far worse with unshakable dignity. No apology needed, he said warmly. Sometimes life's best lessons come from our most uncomfortable moments. What matters isn't the mistake, it's what you learn from it. Grace Anderson observed this exchange with quiet satisfaction, understanding that she was witnessing something far more significant than a simple apology. This was about the triumph of dignity over arrogance, of substance over appearance, of true greatness over mere success. You know what baseball really taught me? Jackie continued, addressing not just Sterling but everyone present. It taught me that the game is bigger than any one player. Just like life is bigger than any one person's prejudices. We're all part of something larger than ourselves. Walter Bennett nodded in agreement, his eyes moist with emotion. Mr. Robinson, you faced things that would have broken most men. But you never let it break your spirit, never let it lower you to their level. You showed us what real strength looks like. The strength wasn't just mine, Jackie replied thoughtfully. It came from everyone who supported change, who believed in the possibility of a better America. Every fan who cheered, every teammate who stood up for what was right, they all shared in that strength. Sterling listened intently, his previous arrogance replaced by genuine humility. How did you do it? He asked, his voice carrying real curiosity now. How did you maintain such dignity in the face of people like me? Jackie's laugh was warm and genuine. Practice, he said simply. Just like baseball, being a good person takes practice. You work at it every day. You remember that everyone you meet is fighting their own battles, carrying their own burdens. And you try, always, to add to their dignity rather than subtract from it. As Chapter 3 draws to a close, the first-class cabin of Flight 217 has become a classroom in humanity and grace. The man who had broken baseball's color barrier has turned an entitled passenger's rudeness into a lesson about the true meaning of class and the importance of treating all people with dignity. What happens next will not only complete Sterling's transformation but will remind everyone present about the difference between genuine greatness and mere success. Stay tuned for Chapter 4, where this extraordinary encounter reaches its powerful conclusion. Don't forget to like and subscribe to catch the final chapter of this moving story. Has someone's quiet dignity ever taught you an unforgettable lesson? Share your story in the comments below. As Flight 217 continued its journey westward, the first-class cabin had transformed into something extraordinary. The usual barriers between passengers had dissolved, replaced by a shared sense of witnessing something special. Jackie Robinson's presence had turned an uncomfortable confrontation into a masterclass in dignity and grace. Richard Sterling sat quietly in his seat, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. The champagne he had so ostentatiously demanded sat untouched, while beside him, Jackie Robinson continued to share stories and wisdom with an attentive audience. You know, Jackie said, his voice carrying the warmth of decades of experience, I've flown first class many times over the years. But I remember when that wasn't possible, when the color of my skin meant I couldn't even enter certain restaurants, let alone fly first class. You learn something from experiences like that. Grace Anderson listened intently as she moved through her service duties. In 15 years of flying, she had never witnessed a more powerful transformation in a cabin's atmosphere. Jackie Robinson's presence had turned a moment of conflict into an opportunity for understanding. What I learned, Jackie continued, was that true class has nothing to do with where you sit on an airplane. It's about how you treat people, especially when they don't know who you are. It's about maintaining your dignity even when others try to take it from you. Walter Bennett clutched his baseball magazine, tears flowing freely down his cheeks. Mr. Robinson, he said, watching you play, watching you handle everything they threw at you, it gave us hope. It showed us that change was possible. James Parker nodded in agreement. My father says that what you did changed more than baseball, he added. You showed America its own reflection, forced us to confront our prejudices. Sarah Mitchell noticed how Sterling had begun to turn slightly in his seat, clearly wanting to say something but struggling to find the words. The businessman's face showed a complex mixture of shame, regret, and the dawning understanding of just how profound his mistake had been. "Mr. Robinson," Sterling finally managed to say, his voice heavy with emotion, "when I think about what you faced in your career, the threats, the insults, the violence, and here I am, adding to that legacy of disrespect. I'm not just embarrassed, I'm ashamed." Jackie's response demonstrated why he had become not just a baseball legend, but a symbol of dignity in the face of prejudice. "You know what's interesting about shame?" he said thoughtfully. "It's only useful if it leads to change. Otherwise, it's just another burden we carry." Catherine Walsh watched this exchange with wonder, understanding that she was witnessing something far more significant than a simple apology. This was about the triumph of dignity over prejudice, of substance over appearance, of true greatness over mere success. "In baseball," Jackie continued, "you can't hold on to your last mistake. You have to learn from it and move forward. The same is true in life. What matters isn't that you made a mistake, it's what you do next." Captain Michael Harrison, making one final visit to the cabin, shared his own perspective. "Mr. Robinson, what you did for baseball, for sports, for society, it went far beyond statistics and records. You showed us what courage looks like when it's paired with dignity." Jackie smiled at this, his eyes carrying memories of a career that had helped change America. "You know what I'm most proud of?" he asked. "Not the stolen bases or the runs scored. I'm proud that I helped show people that character matters more than color, that excellence speaks louder than prejudice." Sterling, fully engaged now, asked the question that had been forming in his mind. "How do you do it?" he wondered aloud. "How do you respond to ignorance with such grace?" "Practice," Jackie replied with a warm smile. "Lots of practice. Branch Rickey told me when he signed me to the Dodgers that I would have to have the courage not to fight back. He said we could only win if we proved that dignity was stronger than hatred." The cabin had fallen into a respectful silence, every passenger understanding that they were receiving wisdom that went far beyond baseball or social status. This was about life, about character, about the kind of success that couldn't be measured in dollars or status symbols. "I've been fortunate," Jackie continued, his voice taking on a thoughtful tone. "Baseball gave me a platform, but it also taught me important lessons. You can't hit every pitch, can't field every ball perfectly. But you can prepare, can give your best effort, can maintain your dignity whether you succeed or fail." Grace Anderson noticed how the other passengers had forgotten their usual first-class amenities, completely absorbed in the presence of someone whose greatness came not just from athletic achievement, but from the way he had carried that achievement with unfailing grace. "Mr. Robinson," Sterling said, his voice stronger now but humbled, "I came into first class today thinking I understood success. I see now that I didn't understand anything at all. True success isn't about what you own, it's about who you are." Jackie nodded approvingly. "Now that," he said with a smile, "is what I call a home run of understanding. Success that's only about money is like a baseball player who can hit but can't field, can't run, can't help his teammates. It's incomplete." As the flight continued westward, the conversation in the first-class cabin flowed naturally between baseball stories and life lessons. Jackie shared memories of Brooklyn, of teammates who had stood by him, of fans who had supported him through the darkest times. But more importantly, he shared wisdom about dignity, about perseverance, about the kind of success that enriches not just oneself but others. Sterling sat quietly, absorbing every word. His phone remained untouched, his earlier need to prove his importance forgotten. He was learning something that no business school could teach: the difference between success and greatness, between wealth and worth. "Before we land," Jackie said, noticing that the flight was nearing its destination, "let me share one last thing. In baseball, as in life, it's not about the individual moments of triumph. It's about how you play the whole game. How you handle both the easy pitches and the tough ones. How you treat people when the crowds aren't watching and the cameras aren't rolling." The cabin fell silent again, everyone present understanding that they had been part of something extraordinary. This wasn't just a flight from New York to Los Angeles. It was a journey from ignorance to understanding, from arrogance to humility. As the plane began its descent, Walter Bennett spoke up one final time. "Mr. Robinson," he said, his voice thick with emotion, thank you. Not just for today, but for everything. You showed us that the biggest victories don't always happen on the baseball field. Jackie's response was characteristic of the man who had changed American sports forever. The real victory, he said warmly, is when we learn to see each other as human beings, deserving of respect regardless of our differences. That's a game we all need to play. As Chapter 4 draws to a close, Flight 217's first-class cabin has become a testament to the transformative power of dignity and grace. Jackie Robinson had turned an uncomfortable confrontation into a lesson about true greatness, about the kind of success that can't be bought with any amount of money. Remember to like and subscribe to witness more incredible stories about the power of dignity and the true meaning of success. Has someone's grace in the face of disrespect ever taught you an unforgettable lesson? Share your story in the comments below. In the end, Jackie Robinson didn't just change one passenger's perspective. He reminded everyone present that true class has nothing to do with where you sit on an airplane and everything to do with how you treat others along life's journey.